Hey, I'm Alex, and I made a video game, and I wanted to make a video to talk about it. But before I get into things, you can actually play the game now. There's a link in the description of the video. So first off, the game is called Help. I can't stop running until I touch all the targets. It's a pretty simple game with a pretty simple premise. Just touch all the targets, and then do it as fast as you can. It was inspired by the Break the Targets minigame in Super Smash Bros. For the N64. It's really a blatant ripoff, and I'm not gonna lie about that. It's a pretty simple platformer that everyone makes when they first start making games or whatever. But like I said, I just want to share my experience while making this game from start to finish, so let's go ahead and get into that. So prior to this project, I really had no experience with the Godot game engine. Beforehand, I was using the GameMaker engine to try and make my games with, but for one reason or another, I would just run into issue after issue, and really wouldn't end up making anything, so I just decided to switch engines. Godot takes care of a lot of things for you. Things that really took me months to figure out in GameMaker were just already done in Godot, so I didn't have to worry about any of that. This is actually something I had to kind of realize, switching engines. I wanted to make games, and in GameMaker, I just wasn't doing that. I was putting the pieces together to make a game, but not actually making the game itself. So just switching was an actual conscious choice. So instead of just pushing forward, I just had to change the engine and go from there. But starting out, I just looked at a bunch of YouTube tutorials for a week or so just to learn the engine. Any tutorials and things that I mention will be linked in the description of the video below. I just want to make sure that the views are given to these people because their tutorials are really, really great, and they were such a big help for me that I just want to spread them around. I want to say, too, that the tutorial that really helped me out at the beginning of my, Godot game engine learning process thing was... I have no idea how to pronounce this person's name. J.M. Bivs? Jim Bivs? Top-down shooter tutorial. It was a really good tutorial that just showed me the basics of using Godot, walked me through everything with a lot of detail, maybe almost a little bit too much for what I could handle, but it was just perfect for me. So that's linked. It's probably going to be the first link in the description. So definitely check that out if you're learning Godot. But after watching tutorial videos, I had enough information to basically cobble something together. So the first thing I had to start with was the player. So working on the player was probably the most enjoyable part. It was really just figuring out what actions the player should be able to perform. I end up using a state machine to control a player's actions. I first had it set up as this giant, ugly switch statement, which now that I realize is called something else in Godot, but whatever, it's a switch statement. But then I actually found GDQuest's state machine tutorial, and then I just ended up using that. Yeah, but then really after getting all that set up, it was just putting in the code to make the player work. This is where I started to figure out nodes and how to get things to talk to each other. In the end, my player could idle, run, jump, wall slide, wall jump, fall, fast fall, crouch, and roll. So it's a pretty, I'm not going to say advanced, but there's enough for it to have some level of depth to it to make it really stand apart. So next up was art. So whenever I first start to make a character for a game, I tend to do the art alongside of when I program it. So I typically start off with a simple white box that can just run around and do basic stuff, really just a placeholder graphic for my character. And then I go into my art program of choice and I just begin to doodle up a character until I get something that just works. Once I think I have something, I draw and animate the action the player performs, and I put that animation into the game. And it's really just that loop of really just programming the action and then animating the character, sometimes in reverse order, but just getting it until it's just all in there. That's really all I could say. So the primary goal for the player's animations was to have them be very, very lively and exaggerated, so you could always tell what the player was doing. Kind of took a cue from the game Cannibal, if anyone remembers that. The player's animations in that game always stuck out, so when I was making my player's animations, I just tried to capture that. So then with the artwork, I definitely did a lot more than I probably should, but that's just kind of the nature of trying to find an idea and just concepting, really just figuring out what things should be, along with a good dose of just over-ambition for a project. But really, at this point, I had the player done, I had a test level, and I had some targets that you could touch. So next, I moved on to playtesting. So right about here, my game was really starting to take shape. So I asked a couple of friends if they wanted to playtest it, and then just let them tear into it. And I got some really good feedback from all of them. The responses ranged from, hey, I like how the character controls, I found this bug, here's how you should design levels, and things like that. One of my playtesters got super, super into it and just left me a good book of text in which he told me some really great things, and then also my character was a Sonic reference because they could roll into a ball and had red shoes. And of course, I got all this feedback over multiple playtest sessions because whenever I would add something major to the game, whether that be like a new player mechanic or something like that, I just wanted to make sure that it was working as intended and would just feel right for the players. But the really interesting thing I found out while playtesting was deciding what feedback was good for my game. I honestly have never really heard that before. I just kind of assume with feedback that you just try and fix everything so everyone will be happy and your game will be great. But I kind of found out that's not the case. You really need to pick what type of feedback you're looking for your game. For instance, take the comment about my character being a Sonic reference. Do I embrace that? Do I just recolor the character blue and really lean into making him like Sonic? Or do I just completely say, no, that's not the case. Let me change my character so they're no longer have red shoes and can't roll into a ball. I had to decide what to do with that comment, and in the end, I really just ended up not caring. I thought it was funny that my playtester came to that conclusion when, for me, I just wanted a character that had shoes and could turn to a ball. But that is kind of a silly example. For something a bit more practical, one of the major things I had to adjust for the game was how the wall jumping was performed by the player. One of my playtesters really liked how the wall jumps were, and the other one found them really difficult to pull off. And the reason why was because of the order in which they pressed the buttons on the keyboard in order to perform the jump. This is something I don't really think about when playing games. I just sort of assume that how I play games is how other people play games. I don't really think about how other players push the buttons. I just kind of think, hey, I do this, so you must do that too. Anyways, the way that wall jumping works for my game is that when the player is on the wall, they get put into an on-wall state. And there are a couple ways the player can leave the state. They can press the W key to jump off the wall, they can hold the opposite direction to fall off the wall, or they can just slide off the wall and hit the ground. The reason the playtester is finding it so hard to do the wall jumps was because they weren't just pressing the W key to jump off the wall, they're pressing W and the direction to move off of the wall. This would cause them to sometimes just fall off the wall. So in order to help the player out, I add a little 0.1 second delay for when the player can leave the wall. If the player were to hit the jump key during that time, a jump would be performed. Otherwise, the player would just fall off the wall. But going back to taking feedback, it was my choice to do something about the wall jump. I could have just ignored it and just had the playtester just deal with it. Or I could try and find a solution not just for the playtester, but for everyone that would try and play the game. And again, I really can't stress this enough, and just because this is so interesting to me, just to never hear this said by anyone, you really have to determine what feedback is good for your game. You have to think about the things you're looking for when you get feedback, so it's up to you to change those things if they need changing. Hopefully that last part didn't get too rambly. Hopefully I made my point. But about here in the project, I really had my player character down. The main gameplay was like all set and done aside from like a few tweaks here and there. All that was left was a bunch of boring stuff that had been steadily growing on my list of things to do. This included stuff like UI that would like track the player's time, making menus for pausing the game when the player beats the level, making a main menu, figuring out how to pause and unpause the game, level transitions, and a bunch of other small boring things. I really found these things just so boring to do because a lot of them were just putting text on the screen, and that's just not making gameplay. But I guess it wasn't all too bad. I definitely learned some things that are really helpful, like learning how to pause the scene tree. I also got to do some stuff with tweens too. Like I made the tile pop in and out, and I also got to use them for my scene transitions. I even got to make a cool tool that would take sprites from a sprite sheet and then turn them into a font. Oh, and then there's stuff like file IO. So this is like saving the files and reading from files. Super useful stuff. This is how I record the player's time and then display it on things like the end of level screen and then level select screen as well. So really at the end of the day, the stuff is boring, is just so boring, but it is entirely useful, and it's something that just needs to be done. You just have to put something interesting in there enough just to break it up so that you kind of have a little bit of fun working on it too. But right about here, at this point, and probably a little bit beforehand, I was really starting to check out. So really the problem at this point was I had just about everything to make a game, just not the levels. So if I was feeling checked out by doing the last part, you can only begin to imagine how checked out I was while making levels. They are just bad, like terrible. I don't like really any of them except for 4, maybe 6 that I kind of consider good, out of like the whole 16. There's a lot to be desired when it comes to levels, but man, I was just really burned out working on this project at this point. My initial plan was I was going to have 20 levels or so, with the first introducing the concepts of the game, and then that would steadily ramp up in difficulty as the game progressed. It's pretty standard stuff. The problem with that was I really had no idea as to how to make a fun level. So to find out, it was a lot of trial and error, which to me meant I basically just scribbled down some semblance of a level and just seeing if any part of it was fun. And this is actually how the last level in the game came to be. I figured out how to properly space jumps and what maneuvers might be tricky for the player to pull off. I was kind of finding the upper bounds of what was difficult in the game, and that also just going really, really fast was fun. So from this, I took the concepts from that level and then kind of worked backwards, just making easier versions of them. This worked for a little bit, but after a while, every level just really started to feel the same. Like every challenge for the level was just the exact same thing. And this really falls into the problem with my game as a whole. There's not much variety in the gameplay. Where other platformers might introduce level mechanics to add variety to the game, my game solely relies on just what the character can perform, like what actions can they do. So I really ran out of ideas to keep things fresh. And you can really tell this while playing this. My playtesters even mention this as well. Some levels are just straight up mirrored, and the rest are just really uninspired and don't offer anything new. But that is really all I can say about the levels. They were just a thing that needed to get done so I could just finish this game. And a really important thing in game development is you gotta know when to stop. So I've failed to mention something throughout this whole video about my game, and that is I originally planned for this game to take me maybe about a month, maybe two at most, to complete. I started this game back in June, and it's taken me about till mid-October to complete. All throughout this project, I was telling myself at the end of the month, the game is going to be done. I was learning a new engine and everything that came with it, and then on top of that, just trying to make a game that was fun to play. Now, I'm not good at knowing how long something will take. I've been told that you take the time you think it's going to take you, multiply that by 2, and then add half, and that's how long it really is going to take you. But all throughout this time, I just had the idea that I was going to finish this game. And it got to the point that, and I've mentioned this well enough, that I just got really burnt out while working on it. So I had to cut things, trim the fat, and just stop working on this game. It didn't need to be this perfect thing, and I got a bad habit of trying to make things as perfect as they can possibly be. So again, I cut stuff, and I told myself that the game is just good enough for now, and it's fine, is okay. The only things I added on from this point were the essentials. Things like cutting down the amount of levels from 20 to 16, making a level select and credits menu, and then adding out-of-bound planes to the levels. And that was it. Okay, so the game may not be the best thing ever, but at least I can say I got something done. Learning how to complete a project is a skill in and of itself. I'm not good at it, but I'm getting better, and hopefully by just completing this game, it shows. Well, that's pretty much it. To wrap things up, some things turned out really good, like I like how the player controls the animates. There's also some polish to the game too, like I have a cool looking tile screen and a level select with some nifty transitions. And other things are kind of bad, mainly the levels. But I'm pretty happy with how things turned out overall. This has really been a good learning experience, and I'm really excited to move forward with making games and really seeing just what I can do. Here's my time for the last level of the game. See if you can beat it. I'm not going to show you my best total time because I don't feel like grinding out level times. I've already played my own game well enough. Yeah, anyways, that's about it. I hope you had a good time watching. Take it easy.